みんながそばにいた。みんなは俺がみんながそばに全力攻撃だ。みんながそばにいてくれれば傷なんて痛まない。
Hello everyone, and welcome to your complete and ultimate Bennett guide. Bennett is one of the strongest 4-stars in the game, and arguably the best 4-star support in the entire game. Bennett is also an incredibly flexible character, with multiple possible build paths, so this video is to thus hopefully guide any current or future Bennett owners on how to roughly build him. This video will cover all of the following in order: general playstyle, talent overview, weapon options, artifact sets and stats, team comps, Constellation overview, as well as an Abyss 12 showcase, all in an as condensed manner as possible for you to easily look back upon. Chapters and timestamps are also in the description below. Also, as a disclaimer, I will try to be as general as possible with the information to accommodate roughly any Bennett player, as I know not everyone has all his constellations. But just keep in mind that all of the footage recorded is with both a C6 Bennett on my main account and a C1 Bennett on my free-to-play account. Keep in mind that I will usually be talking about a C1 and above Bennett when discussing his kit, as I consider his first constellation a practically must-have. With that out of the way, let's get right into the guide. Bennett's primary use is as an attack buffer. His elemental burst provides a massive flat attack buff to any character standing within his burst circle. As a bonus, Bennett is also a healer, as standing in his burst radius also provides healing, scaling off his max HP. This makes his elemental burst the most important part of his kit, meaning that recharge is a massive necessity for Bennett to get as much uptime on his burst as possible. Bennett's utility doesn't just stop there as an attack buffer and healer though, as he is also an excellent pyro applicator thanks to his 2U application skill, a fantastic pyro battery due to his skill's short cooldown and high energy particle count, and has unparalleled synergy with Kazuha due to his burst applying pyro to the active character on the field. This makes him and Kazuha near essential team members in any team comp relying on vape or reverse melt for damage. Bennett often acts as one of the best support options in most team comps due to his massive attack buff and healing capabilities both in one. He is very burst dependent, making energy recharge the most important stat when building. Basically, Bennett just appears on the field in a rotation to throw down his ult, or to use his skill to battery himself or another pyro character in the party like Xiangling. While less common, you can play Bennett as a DPS, especially if you have him at Constellation 6. However, I highly discourage this as Bennett's own multipliers aren't really that amazing, and the amount of gains he gets by buffing himself won't be as much as him buffing an actual DPS. Starting with his normal attack talent, Bennett has a completely unexceptional normal attack string. It has 5 hits and fairly standard multipliers, and his charge attack is also nothing special, dealing 2 heavy hits. I do not recommend leveling this talent at all, since it is completely non-essential to Bennett's kit unless you play a DPS Bennett. Bennett's elemental skill has 3 different charges, so I'll go over each one. When tapped, Bennett simply does a single hit which deals pyro damage. This provides 2 pyro particles and has a short 5-second cooldown. He can also deal fairly decent damage, especially with reactions or when buffed by his own elemental burst. Holding to level 1 deals 1 additional hit that can launch small enemies, and holding to level 2 deals a final big hit that explodes, knocking both enemies and Bennett himself back. Bennett will not take any damage when this occurs though, and he also will not be blown back if he has a shield on. Doing either level 1 or level 2 will result in 3 pyro particles instead of 2, and will increase the cooldown to 7.5 or 10 seconds respectively. Generally, you should almost always use the tap version of the skill due to its short cooldown, making it the most energy efficient tool to battery both Bennett himself or another pyro character like Xiangling. However, the hold versions can occasionally be useful to break certain elemental shields faster. I also generally don't recommend leveling this talent, at least until after you have focused leveling his burst to a high enough talent level first. Bennett's elemental burst is one of the most powerful bursts in the entire game, so let's go over it in detail. When Bennett activates his burst, he throws down a massive pyro circle. When standing in the circle's radius, there are 3 things that will occur. Firstly, the active character standing within the circle will receive a massive flat attack buff. This attack buff received scales completely off of Bennett's base attack, as indicated by the white number over here, which is calculated by both Bennett's own base attack as well as the base attack of the weapon he's carrying. This means that getting additional attack from artifacts or weapon substats will not contribute to his buff at all, and also incentivizes leveling Bennett and his weapon to level 90, as that is the only way to maximize his base attack. At level 90, with a level 90 Missplitter Reforged, which has the highest base attack out of any sword in the game, and with his burst at talent level 13, Bennett will provide a 1202 flat attack buff to the active character, which is massive. Of course, this is in the best case scenario, aka with him crowned, with his best weapon, and with him at least at Constellation 5. But even with a completely free-to-play build, the attack buff is still the highest you can obtain in the game out of any other support. As you can see, I do significantly more damage with Bennett's ult, and characters who can snapshot their skills or bursts, meaning that they calculate the stats at the point you unleash the skill or burst, and sticks to it throughout the entire skill or burst duration, take the best advantage of Bennett's burst, as this means that they can go off-field, or leave the circle, and still do the same amount of damage as they would if they were in the circle. Because of how strong this attack buff is, I highly recommend only using high base attack weapons on Bennett, which I'll get to in the next section. Secondly, while standing in the circle, Bennett will also heal you. This healing scales completely off of Bennett's max HP, and the scaling is actually pretty good. This also makes Bennett fulfill both the attack buffer and healer slot, allowing you to be more flexible with your other supports. The healing takes roughly every second or so it's very quick and reliable. However, the caveat is that you will only receive healing when you are under 70% HP, meaning that unless you build Bennett with a ridiculous amount of HP, or with a healing bonus circlet, you will likely never be healed to full health with Bennett. Though I don't think this is a problem due to how fast and significant his healing ticks are in the first place anyway. Thirdly, while standing in the circle, Pyro is applied to the active character. This is especially strong when used in conjunction with Kazuha, as it makes it the easiest way for Kazuha to infuse his burst with Pyro, and also makes for very easy double swirling with other elements at the same time to buff both Pyro and another element. Bennett's burst will stay on the field for 12 seconds, and it has a 15-second cooldown. This means that if you build enough energy recharge, you can actually have only 3 seconds of downtime on his burst. Bennett's burst is by far the most important part of his kit, and is undoubtedly one of the strongest bursts in the game. Its attack buff is second to none, and its healing doubles down even further, skyrocketing Bennett's position as one of, if not the most essential 4-star unit in the entire game. However, just keep in mind that Bennett may not always be the best support for specific team comps. Characters such as Yelan or Nilou scale off HP, and other stuff like his Pyro application makes him unsuitable for freeze teams. Now, because Bennett's primary use is for his attack buff, I will primarily be discussing weapons based on their base attack, since that is what his buff scales completely off of. It is by far the most important thing to look out for when picking an appropriate weapon, as other stats like energy recharge are eventually obtainable from improving your artifacts, whereas base attack is something that you cannot get anywhere else other than the weapon and Bennett's own level. Starting with the 5-star options, we have the Missplitter Reforged and the Aquila Favonia. These two weapons are the only swords in the game that have a base attack of 674. This thus makes them the best option for Bennett's attack buff. If you also plan to build your Bennett to do decent damage, the Missplitter is an incredible option as it offers crit damage as a substat, as well as giving much more pyro damage. The Aquila Favonia, while having equally high of a base attack, has a practically useless substat and useless passive that's not really that helpful. However, I should mention that the Missplitter Reforged is arguably the best sword in the game, and you are better off putting it on a main DPS sword user instead of Bennett, as it would impact that character far more than it would on Bennett's attack buff. On the other hand, the Aquila Favonia is not a great weapon on pretty much any other character, so if you have it, you should definitely put it on Bennett, as it performs identically to the Missplitter in terms of the attack buff. The other 5-star weapon I would recommend for Bennett is the Skyward Blade. It doesn't have as high of a base attack as the Missplitter or Aquila Favonia, but it is still decently high at 608 while having energy recharge as a substat. While its passive is practically useless, this weapon strikes a great balance between burst uptime and attack buff. It also helps that it is one of the worst 5-star weapons in the game, meaning that you are unlikely to be using this on on any other character other than Bennett. You might be wondering why I'm not bringing up any other 5-star options that also have a 608 base attack, and that's because those are normally strong DPS weapons, such as the Harange Pakufutsu or the Summit Shaper. These weapons are better served on actual DPS characters, and the only reason the Skyward Blade was mentioned was due to its energy recharge substat. Freedom Sworn is also a decent option on Bennett, assuming you do not have Kazuha. As a side note, I do not recommend any weapon with a 542 base attack, such as the Primordial Jade Cutter, as the base attack is far too low, lower than some of the 4-star options on this list. Kicking off the 4-star list, we have the Prototype Rancor. This is a completely free-to-play weapon and is given to you the moment you hit AR 10. This weapon is pretty much useless on every other character, but it has a decently high base attack at 565 at level 90. This makes it a great option for Bennett's attack buff. However, aside from its base attack, its substat and passive are pretty much useless, so there isn't anything special about this weapon. Next up, we have the Sapwood Blade. The Sapwood is generally the option I recommend to anyone building Bennett these days. It has a 565 base attack at level 90 and energy recharge as a substat. It is also craftable, making this the perfect free-to-play option for Bennett. However, this weapon is only craftable after completing certain quest lines in Sumeru, meaning that newer players will not have access to this weapon early game. It also has a somewhat usable passive, though it is quite finicky, and I generally wouldn't bother thinking too much about it unless you play specific Dendro teams. Blackcliff Longsword also has a 565 base attack and can be purchased in the Star Glitter shop, making this a free-to-play option as well. It offers crit damage as a substat, making this a better option than the Prototype Rancor if you care about Bennett's own damage. Finally, the only 4-star weapon on this list with above 565 base attack is the Ali Flash. This weapon has 620 base attack at level 90, making it Bennett's best 4-star weapon. However, it is a limited banner weapon, meaning it is only obtainable via pulling on specific weapon banners that carry it. Its passive and substat are also not super useful, so you could still argue that Sapwood Blade might be an overall better option. Sacrificial and Favonius both give a ton of energy recharge, but their base attack is far too low for me to ever recommend using them. Getting on to artifacts, Bennett is a very unique character due to the very wide but very specific manners to go about building him. The most important stat for Bennett is always going to be energy recharge. I highly recommend getting to over 200% energy recharge and optimally over 220%. This is to ensure constant uptime on his burst, so his sands should always be energy recharge. For his Goblet and Circlet main stats, however, there are a ton of ways to go about it. For those who are lower investment, you can throw literally whatever on Bennett and it'll be fine. For high investment or endgame players though, you should start investing in Bennett's damage. So for those who are just building Bennett, your Goblet can be HP, and your Circlet can also be HP or healing bonus. This way, you maximize his healing. For players moving into the endgame though, I instead recommend either a Pyro damage or HP Goblet, but the Circlet should always be crit rate. This is because once you hit a certain point, damage is actually very valuable, even on your supports. And Bennett has actually decent multipliers on his skill and burst. Bennett's healing, even with a damage focused build, is also still more than enough. And if you need like 7000 HP healing per tick on his burst, you should probably work on becoming a better player first. However, you can opt for an HP Goblet instead of a Pyro one if you wish to get a better middle ground between healing and damage. Like I said, building Bennett's damage is something that requires more investment, so I don't recommend this build unless you have good enough builds on your other main damage dealers first. Moving on to artifact set recommendations, we have 4-piece Noblesse Oblige. This further boosts Bennett's support potential by providing the entire team with 20% additional attack, and can be consistently activated, assuming you have enough energy recharge to use Bennett's ult very often. This is the overall set I recommend the most, as it makes his already strong support capabilities even stronger. From here on out though, the rest of the sets are generally more tailored towards Bennett's personal damage. I generally do not recommend using these over Noblesse unless you actually want to build him as a main DPS. 4-piece Crimson Witch of Flames. If you have Bennett at Constellation 6 and wish to play a vaporized build, 4-piece Crimson is a decent option to maximize his vape damage. 4-piece Lava Walker. If instead of playing vape, you want to play a mono pyro Bennett instead, 4-piece Lava Walker is also a usable option. 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate. If you wish to maximize Bennett's burst damage, then 4-piece Emblem is the best option. He would generally be built with a ton of energy recharge anyway, his burst multipliers are actually good, and the 2-piece bonus also grants him an additional 20% recharge for burst uptime, making this a pretty decent option if you just want his burst damage. Bennett is a very flexible character and works with practically any team where the DPS is attack scaling. He is so flexible in fact that it's probably easier to name teams where he isn't as beneficial. Yelan is a character who does not benefit from Bennett since her entire kit is HP scaling. However, if you play Vape Yelan, then Bennett is still a very good team member if paired with Kazuha. Speaking of Kazuha, due to the way Bennett's burst applies pyro to the active character, as well as the way Kazuha's burst infusion works, this makes the two of them insanely strong for any team comp that requires off-field pyro application. One popular example would be Melt Ganyu, where Bennett can provide Ganyu with the massive attack buff, while Kazuha's fast pyro application on his burst will allow Ganyu to consistently reverse melt all of her charge shots. Bennett is also a staple in many hypercarry teams, such as the hypercarry Raiden, hypercarry Ito, monopyro Klee, monopyro or Vape Yoimiya, hypercarry Diluc, etc, etc, etc. Basically, he works in almost any team. He is just that flexible. There are some team members that can't use him, which I'll cover when I discuss his Constellation 6, but in general, Bennett is a fantastic character to be slotted into any team that has an attack scaling character, so just use him as you'd like. Bennett's constellations are often a massive point of debate, so let's go over them in detail. Constellation 1. This is by far Bennett's most important constellation. This removes the HP requirement to gain his attack buff from his burst. I didn't discuss it earlier as I consider this a must-have, but without it, you will need to wait for the active character to heal up above 70% HP before getting the attack boost. I find this constellation a practically essential one to have, so if you are planning on playing Bennett, I highly recommend trying to pull this. As a bonus, you also gain a bigger attack boost from Bennett's base attack. Constellation 2 is pretty self-explanatory and is overall a fairly useless constellation. Constellation 3 and 5 increase his skill and burst talent levels by 3 levels respectively. Constellation 5 is incredibly strong as it improves his healing and attack buff by quite a decent amount. Constellation 4. The wording on the constellation is kind of confusing, but to put it simply, it basically turns Bennett's level 1 skill to a slightly weaker level 2. By holding his E to level 1, then mashing your attack button right after, you will do a final hit that is very similar to his level 2 skill, but you will not be launched back, and will have a shorter cooldown than his level 2 counterpart. Again, unless you are playing a DPS Bennett, this constellation is fairly useless. And finally, Constellation 6, the biggest point of controversy. This makes any melee character have pyro infusion on their normal, charge, and plunge attacks, unless their kit specifically states that they cannot have their own infusion overridden. This also provides a 15% pyro damage bonus, though despite the odd wording, this damage bonus applies to any character, including bow and catalyst users. There is a ton of debate going on about the pros and cons about this constellation, as having pyro infusion can be a net negative for specific characters. For example, Keqing is a character who relies fairly heavily on her electro-infused charge attacks. If you wish to get Bennett's attack buff, but have him at Constellation 6, Keqing will now be doing pyro damage instead, which is obviously not ideal. On the other hand, C6 Bennett boosts his pyro support capabilities thanks to the 15% damage bonus, which is especially nice for characters such as Diluc or Yoimiya, and also opens up many fun and interesting comps that can be done due to the pyro infusion. Let me put it this way, C6 Bennett is not as big of a problem as it used to be. More and more characters coming out who have elemental infusion in their own kits generally cannot be overridden, and the few characters that C6 Bennett can negatively affect are extremely minimal. The most prominent characters of note being Razor, Eula, Ayaka, and Keqing. Razor is one of the worst characters in the game, while Eula and Ayaka generally should not be played with Bennett anyways, since they have better tailored supports at their disposal. Keqing would be the best case to argue for, though even then, now with Dendro, Bennett is less of a necessity for Keqing to perform well. My baseline take is that C6 Bennett is generally not a problem, and I've had him at Constellation 6 for a very long time now. It has opened up many fun and interesting comps that would otherwise be impossible, and I've never had an issue where I wish he wasn't. However, if you are unsure whether it will benefit you or not, or simply want to remain on the safe side for future characters, then just don't do it, as you don't lose anything by not activating this constellation. Finally, for the Abyss Showcase. For this showcase, I will be playing Bennett in a typical Hyper Carry Raiden team comp on the bottom half of Abyss 12. Thanks for watching this Bennett guide, and I wish everyone the best of luck building Bennett. He is one of the best characters in the game, and also one of my favorite to play. Do also check out twitch.tv/DukC, where I often stream Genshin Impact. Thanks everyone once again for watching, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Take care.